The climate change narrative continues to pick up speed as the snowball only continues to grow larger and larger. And with that comes more force when it finally makes impact at the base of the hill. And I would argue the base of that impact is going to be the destruction of the energy grid. Because if our energy grid cannot handle Texas, California, Arizona, and New Mexico having extreme heat waves, and they end up having blackouts, which luckily we do not really suffer here in Houston where I live, but they do suffer in some other places in parts of Texas and other parts of the country. At what point will we be able to sustain every single person having an electric car hooked up to the grid? When you have an electric car, it's effectively the equivalent of having 13 refrigerators plugged up to the grid and running and cycling at all times while it's charging. So consider that for all people continuously cycling in and out of gas stations, or if they have home chargers, and that will effectively be 13 refrigerators running at all times consistently, farming the grid and taxing it to a degree that it cannot sustain when it already can't sustain the output that it needs due to the nature of how many people it's supposed to provide for currently and the fact of how bad the heat is. California hasn't reindustrialized their energy grid in decades. It's something they've been needing to work on for a long time and haven't, and now they're going after this major energy push because they're talking about the fact that, well, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can go ahead and ban gas cars by 2025. They talked about doing this throughout the states. I know California is going to be stopping the sale of all gas guzzlers in 2025. What that means is supply and demand will kick in. It's only going to be harder to get pieces to repair these actual gas guzzlers that people have. People will have to go out of state to get one of these cars if they want one. And then because the fact that they will no longer be actually making these vehicles, it's going to make the parts that they're making more expensive because they're not making as many, because they're not selling as many, which is going to mean the price of the object goes up. Simple supply and demand. Now that we see that what's going on with the electric cars, we roll into the fact that they're now coming for the gas stoves. And they said, no, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. We're not coming for your gas stoves. And then it turns out that there's legislation to go after and ban gas stoves. And now they're once again coming after gas generators, which people in the South and places where I live, where there are mass amounts of hurricanes that decimate people's capacity to use the power grid because it goes down because the infrastructure can't handle the weather. Well, what we see is they're trying to ban their capacity to do this, as well as roll out a ban on hot water heaters. What's that? You want to live in the 21st century and take a hot shower? Well, sorry, this puts out too much carbon, and we need to actually remove that carbon, despite the fact that you yourself may be the carbon we want to remove. Topic for a different day. Go watch my recent video on Kamala Harris and climate change and all the other stuff that I've recently covered with climate change and the narrative. So, let's go ahead and jump into this. This is quite fascinating that we've gone from, no, don't worry, it's not happening, to, yes, we're coming after your gas stoves. We want you to only have electric cars. You shouldn't drive gas guzzlers. We were going to take your gas generators, and don't worry, you won't be able to heat your water and take a hot shower. This is ridiculous. Let's get into it. From the Epoch Times, we have the Biden administration rule would ban nearly all portable gas generators. Yeah, this isn't dangerous at all for the fact of what's going to happen to the millions of Americans that rely on them. After seeking to reduce gas stoves, the Biden administration is pushing a proposal to ban the sale of almost all portable gas generators, which some experts have said would be disastrous for the millions of Americans who rely on such generators during power outages. Yeah. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission has proposed a policy that would remove nearly all existing portable gas generators from the market. The new rule restricts the amount of carbon monoxide that generators can emit by forcing those generators to switch off when they reach a certain level of emissions. What's that? It's the winter and you don't have power because the lines froze and you don't have any capacity to actually, heat your home because the power's out, so you don't have anything to power the heater in your home. Well, at least you got this gas generator. Don't you worry about it. Sorry, we're going to have to take that away from you, and the elderly people in your elderly care home are going to have to suffer because you can't use these gas generators. That is the type of proposal that this means. That is what they're representing here. You have to think of who this will affect, and this will affect the elderly that are sitting there in a care facility because the power goes out, because they just simply don't have it because it's cold, or let's say the grid's having some struggle and is dealing with issues because people are running their heat so much and it's straining the grid because the cold is affecting, or let's say a line snaps. Well, what do they need? They need heat. And what can these generators do? They can offer something that can provide power for a source to give heat. And what are they saying? No, sorry, too bad. We're going to need you to cut your emissions. Smaller gas generators would have to cut carbon monoxide emissions by 50%, and large generators would have to cut emissions by up to 95%. Nearly all models currently available are expected to not be in compliance with the new standard. Once the proposed rule comes into effect, manufacturers would have to comply with them in just 6 months, a process that usually takes several years. The rules would also ban manufacturers from stockpiling non-compliant generators before the new standards are enacted. So you can't operate freely in the market to go ahead and stockpile the resources because we're using top-down totalitarian restrictions on the market to do so. We'll make sure that you don't have time to actually restructure and reformat the generator so you can try and build something new that goes to our emission standards. And what we'll do is we'll just make a standard that completely decimates the capacity for every single one of these generators to be viable in the market under our new regulatory structure. Yeah, sure, I'm so sure that they care so much about the civilian populace. Generator manufacturers speak out. In June 28th, a press release, Susan Organa, executive producer of the Portable Generator Manufacturers Association, pointed out that the CPSPC's proposal will create a shortage of essential portable generators during regional and national emergencies, because what this will do is prevent the sale of portable generators that are currently available on the market, as I just stated. Furthermore, the timing of the CPSPC's proposed changes that are particularly concerning given the repeated warnings that two-thirds of North America is currently facing an energy shortfall this summer during periods of high demand, she said. But that doesn't matter to them, because these people are sitting in the suburbs outside of Washington, D.C., they're sitting in the suburbs outside of Langley, they're sitting in Martha's Vineyard, they're in the high-rises of New York, and they're not concerned about this, because they're talking about climate change, but you know who doesn't care about climate change? The poor. The poor don't care about climate change because they're more concerned with having cheap energy to heat their homes. Nearly 5 million households across the United States has gas-powered generators during power outages, and they're particularly important during hurricane season, which is relevant where I live, when powerful storms are often knock out electricity and electrical utilities, which it happens quite literally every single year. There's a major storm that completely wipes out the power grid. If it's not here, it's in Louisiana. If it's not in Louisiana, it's in Mississippi. If it's not in Mississippi, it's in Florida. If it's not in Florida, it's in Georgia. It happens literally everywhere in the South. Where I am right now, I wish they would do something to restructure and reindustrialize the grid. The wind blows more than 15 miles an hour and my power will go out. It's ridiculous, but nonetheless, Texas infrastructure, we saw what happened when it snowed here, shut down the entire state for 2 weeks basically. Absolutely insane, but again, Texas infrastructure not set up for the cold, and apparently not even for the wind. In May, the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation warned that two-thirds of Americans could face blackouts and brownouts between June and September if there are a wide area of heat waves, wildfires, and droughts, and the agency attributed some blame for the problem to the Biden administration's push for renewable energy. And it absolutely is. If this hadn't been being pushed top-down from a regulatory agency that was then pushed on the market, they wouldn't have to do these things, and people would be able to properly structure themselves, and they wouldn't be having these massive problems that would be met with the grid. This also comes with the fact that we're spending something like roughly $200 billion in Ukraine, and we can't pay to reindustrialize the energy grid in the United States. Are you kidding me? Places like Baltimore and Detroit are absolutely decimated. The people that are sitting there in their education system have incredibly low literacy rates. They can't do math at grade level. But no, don't worry about it. We'll go ahead and finance other countries and worry about wars abroad. We're not going to worry about the civilian populace of our own country. The Department of Energy is also focusing on efforts mandating standards for dishwashers. Jesus Christ! In a bid to improve efficiency and cut energy usage, the agency has proposed new regulations for power and water usage for standard size and compact dishwashers during their regulation cycles. The administration is using all of the tools at our disposal to save Americans money while promoting innovations that will reduce carbon pollution and combat the climate crisis. No, you're not! You don't care about the fact of reducing the price on the average civilian. Otherwise, you wouldn't be putting out of business the car manufacturers that will be making gas guzzlers where people can go buy a $10,000 car that is cheap so they can go get something that's a hoopty that they can go drive for the next 5 to 6 years that will last them. No, what we're going to do is, we're going to make sure you can't drive this car. We're going to make it illegal, and then we'll also fine you if you do. We're going to make sure the parts that you need to actually fix the car and rebuild it, those are more expensive because the production of them has been relegated to being so much more minimum based on the fact that we're not allowing the production and sale of new gas cars, so that's going to be more expensive. Oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. What we need you to do is go spend $60,000 on this electric vehicle. How is it that someone that can't make $5,000 for a new vehicle, someone who can't save $1,000 for an emergency when they're at the hospital, as most people in America currently can't, how is it that those people are going to go ahead and collect, I don't know, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 for a new electric car? Oh, well, don't worry. We'll give you a summons to pay for this. Well, okay. What they're going to do is, and they talked about this before, that we're going to give a $5,000 credit to anyone that wants to buy an electric vehicle. It's like, okay. Do you know what happened? The people that make the electric vehicles are just going to raise the price of their car by $5,000 so that they're not eating the overhead cost. It's that simple. In the end, the person who's paying for the good will always be paying for the good, because the person who's making it will always make you pay more if a regulatory structure is using top-down control to try and structure their market. What we see is for emissions, harms, and safety standards, it says the CPSC is justifying its proposed new rules by arguing that carbon monoxide emissions have been extremely harmful to human health, which, I mean, yeah, I suppose you can literally die from carbon monoxide poisoning. From 2004 through 2021, there are at least 1,332 co-related consumer deaths involving portable generators, on an average about 74 lives lost annually, with thousands of non-fatal poisonings of consumers per year. Fatalities have increased in recent years. For example, for the 3 most recent years, which complete data available from 2017 to 2019, generator-related co-deaths have averaged 85 per year. So, because 85 people decided to make a decision that unfortunately ended their lives, we're going to make sure that you yourself can't have a generator. It's nonsense. It's nothing more than nonsense. Moving on to the good old New York Post, we see the Biden administration proposes clamp down on home water heaters. What's that? You want to heat the water in your home? You want to make sure that you can wash the dishes with some warm water in the sink before you throw it in the dishwasher? Well, don't worry. We're going to make sure that we're regulating your dishwasher and your water heater. At what point is this not just totalitarian control, simply for the factor that we can make you bend to our whim? Water heaters could be subject to much more stringent efficiency requirements in the recent Department of Energy proposal that has been critiqued by Republican lawmakers that goes into effect. I'm not a Republican. They piss me off and annoy me to no end. But yeah, they're right about this. What we're going to do is we're going to regulate your capacity to have hot water. Welcome to the third world. And even they can do that because they can just burn fire. So what's that? Hold on. This would be absolutely hilarious. They're like, all right, we're going to regulate hot water. And then people start actually burning things like wood and charcoal and all of this stuff to actually heat pans so they can go ahead and have hot water for different things. Imagine that. You just end up naturally introducing more carbon into the atmosphere because you make people have to go around and do things that are more primitive simply because you wanted to use top-down restriction. It comes months after the Biden administration ignited a firestorm over the stovetop regulation. Albany lawmakers enacted in a controversial first-in-the-nation gas stove ban in New York. Yeah, if you live in New York, you literally can't have a gas stove. And I wonder if this is the fact that they're telling you, no, you can't have a gas stove that's new, and we won't put in any new gas lines, or anyone that now has a gas stove, we're going to shut off your gas within X amount of time, and you have to get a electric stove. I have an electric stove. I don't mind it. I've heard cooking with a gas stove is far better, though. Therefore, I would much rather try cooking with a gas stove. And I honestly just want one because they're saying, fuck you, you can't have one. Today's actions, together with our industry partners and stakeholders, improve outdated efficiency standards for common household appliances, which is essentially the slashing utility bills for American families and cutting harmful carbon emissions. Yeah. The Biden administration anticipates the regulatory plan set to go into effect by 2029 will save Americans $198 billion and slash CO2 emissions by 501 million metric tons over the next 30 years. So they just say this. There's literally no data cited. They don't give you anything. There's nothing presented. It's just random numbers thrown up and given to people so that they can be distributed to the New York Post. And then the New York Post distributes to people because they're like, yeah, look, this is what we were told. Look, this is how much they're going to reduce it by. It's like, I want to see the data. I want to see the math. And then another thing is, data, a lot of times people don't know how to read it. You need to actually understand the process of how to see what was being funded, what was excluded, if anything was excluded intentionally, what was added intentionally to make sure that people weren't actually paying attention to certain things within the data. The major thing that comes, and this really happened with what you saw with the data from the COVID crisis, was that so much was obfuscated, and you saw this with comorbidities, that people with pre-existing comorbidities weren't being talked about. It was only talked about the fact of how COVID was so dangerous, and it didn't talk about who this was affecting because they were obfuscating that information, much like they're obfuscating the information on, well, how this is going to affect people and who's going to save the money and how they're going to save it and what the processes are going to be. The department is planning to ratchet up a minimum efficiency standard for gas-fired water heaters, oil-fired storage water heaters, and gas-fired instantaneous water heaters. So effectively, almost all of them. The collective efficiency measures were set to save Americans $570 billion over 3 decades, officials said. And again, officials say, the experts say. I don't know about you, but I've had just about enough of being told, well, the experts say, and then I have to listen. I'd rather actually read the data myself. That's all I've got for this. They're coming for your gas stoves. They're coming for your gas generators. They're coming for your water heater. And soon they'll be coming for the power that's in your home, because don't you worry, they're not going to reindustrialize the grid. They're just going to capsize it. That's all I've got for this one. Stay lovely, stay great. Give this a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't. Subscribe if you enjoyed this. Tell someone you love them. Peace out.